I fear that I have too much material for an hour tonight. So if I go a few minutes over, I hope you will accept my apologies. I will try and make sure I have less in the future. But once I got started, it was kind of hard to stop adding things. So I just say I want to do a square. Oops. I needed to hit a button first. I need to hit share screen. And then I want to go to this right here. So can all of you see this?
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Trying to get it. Okay. Oh, it's showing the next slide. I don't know how I did that, but just as an introduction, as I said, Carl Matzenbacher and Michael Strahan had agreed to be support for me on this. It started out as an idea, as a way to give our church, people who are in First Universal Presbyterian, people who are interested in Cuba, a chance to learn a little bit about it. So the plan is we're going to do this on a weekly basis, every Wednesday from 7 to 8. And the address that I sent you for this meeting will be the same for every meeting. But I will send out weekly reminders too. And obviously we're doing this by Zoom. This is a list of several of the topics tentatively I've got on the list. And I don't have a set ending date. It's sort of going to be when I run out of steam. I want to start out tonight with a brief history of, a brief geography of Cuba, including some demographics. And then next week, talk about the history of Cuba. After that, talking about the history of the Presbyterian Church in Cuba. They just had a major 130-year anniversary of the start of the Presbyterian Church there. I want to talk about the partnership that our church, Universal Presbyterian Church, has had in Cuba. I'm asking Carl to do something about agriculture in Cuba, and I've got some stuff I need to send you, Carl. I thought I'd talk about Living Waters for the World, which has been a big part of some of our participation there. And then we got some more fuzzily defined topics like education, science, and medicine in Cuba. The United States-Cuba partnership, which is a continuously evolving nightmare right now. And then maybe a little bit just about what it's like to go to Cuba and travel there. So given that, let's go ahead and start. And let me go to my other PowerPoint that I had. I think this is the one that I want. Nope, wrong one. And okay, so here we go. I've kind of enjoyed finding old maps. This is an old map of Cuba, and I wonder if there's a way for me to.
What's your real name?
I don't want to see a slide. What I want to do is get rid of this notes thing here. High presenter view. Let's see if that does it. Is that a little bit better?
No, it's the same.
This is an old.
You're going to have to.
It's the same for you?
Presentation, George.
There you go.
Okay, so it's okay?
Fantastico.
So this is an old map of Cuba, and I'm not sure of the actual date, but it points out something that I want to talk about, and that's how geopolitical boundaries in Cuba have changed a lot over the years. And if you can read it or not, this says right here, Eastern Department, and this says Western Department. So Cuba was split into an Eastern and Western half whenever this map was drawn. And you will still see references to Oriente, which for the eastern part of Cuba. The problem with getting images off the internet is they're not always very high resolution. There's a date down the bottom of this map, but I can't make it out. It's either 1819 or 1879. I'm guessing it's probably 1879. But if I blow it up, it just gets fuzzier. It's not like TV where they can. Yeah, can't do like CSI. But there's several divisions here. Here's a little bit later map, which I really am intrigued by because, again, I don't have the source. And you can see, I think, a crease down the middle. So this is folded out of a book, perhaps. And all these faces and people on horseback and stuff suggest to me this is somehow linked to a political event. I'm guessing that it's the Spanish-American War, as we call it, or Cuba's war for independence from Spain. I noticed that there's a Cuban flag in this little diorama down here. The Cuban flag was designed in 1849, but wasn't officially adopted in 1902. So this puts us at about the ballpark of about the turn of the century there, about 1900, when the Spanish-American War took place. And you can see by the colors, there are some divisions here in the country even then. But it's kind of hard to figure out what they are. So I've got a better map right here. This one is still not the most current. This is one from 2007, but it gives me a chance to point out a number of features. And by the way, everybody feel free to chime in if you've got a question or a comment as I go along here. I'm too prone to lecture, and I don't want this to just be a lecture. I want to give you a tour of Cuba. We'll see what comes. So here's a drawing of Cuba in almost its most recent form. And a couple of features here. First of all, Cuba is 90 miles from Key West, Florida. So that's not much difference in the distance between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. The capital of Cuba, the nation, is the city of Havana. A number of other landmarks. Down here in the bottom right on the southeast, in the province of Guantanamo is the U.S. naval base in Guantanamo Bay. And we'll talk about this later on in history, but after the Spanish-American War, the United States helped Cuba write their constitution and included in it a provision that the United States could always have a base on Cuban land. The Cubans would like the United States to leave. There are a lot of Americans that would like that, but I don't know if or when it will happen. Some other landmarks. Down here on the south side, more towards the west, is the Bay of Pigs. Most of us probably remember certainly we heard about in school, the ill-fated attempt by Cuban expatriates in the United States, and probably with the conspiring of the CIA, there was an attempt to overthrow the Fidel Castro government. And it did not turn out well. But that's where the Bay of Pigs is. Up here, we have the city of Mariel. The bay in Mariel is a deep water port, and there's a lot of industry around Mariel. And again, if you have a good long memory, you may remember talk about the Mariel boat people. This was people that were taking rafts and boats, whatever they could put together, and leaving Cuba from Mariel, going towards Key West, Florida. Many of the people who arrived in that wave from Cuba into the United States had been released from prisons or from mental hospitals. And it was problematic. Some other locations here. Right in the middle, just north of the city of Colón, is a little tiny town called San Jose de los Ramos. And this is where University Presbyterian's partner church is located. And we'll have a lot to say about that later. A little bit to the west of that is the community of Sabanilla. It's also known as Juan G. Gomez, so it has two names. Juan Gomez, I believe, was a revolutionary hero. The town of Sabanilla has a little Presbyterian church in it that is the partner church of First Presbyterian Church in Lafayette. And
Yay.
a number of us have gone there to be involved in installing a water system there. So we'll talk about that later on also. On the northern shore is the town of Matanzas. The Bay of Matanzas is another deep water port, and there's a lot of shipping that comes in and out of here. There are a number of reasons that's important to us. There's a seminary in Matanzas that is a frequent dormitory location for us on our trips. There are also several churches there. The Presbytery of South Louisiana installed a water system at Matanzas Central Church. There are several other churches there where the pastors are good friends of ours, so we'll talk about that later over the weeks also. A little bit further to the east is an island peninsula called Veradero. After Havana, this is probably the second most popular tourist location in Cuba. There are a lot of tourist hotels, beautiful white sand beaches. The water is gorgeous. The Presbyterian church that's located in Veradero, the Dora Arce Valentin Church, has a dormitory where we have stayed on numerous trips. And the pastor of that church, a man named Dopico, has been involved in many of our activities over the years. Some other landmarks down here in the bottom southeast corner, you see Haiti, and to the right of that's the Dominican Republic, and they really got hit very hard the last few days by hurricane or tropical storm Laura. Next to that is Jamaica. Then we have the Cayman Islands. And then to the northeast, we have the Bahamas. So maybe this helps give you an idea of the physical layout of the island of Cuba in relation to the United States and some of the other countries that we hear about so much. The Hurricane Laura did go, let me start back up. The Hurricane Marco basically hit just the western end of Cuba on the Pinar del Rio province. Did not do much. Hurricane Laura went all the way along the island as far as I know of, but the most recent information I've gotten is that they did not sustain any loss of life, and I don't know what kind of damage. But whereas Haiti and Dominican Republic, there are at least, I believe, 11 people that died there. So here's a little bit better picture of the provinces of Cuba. Let me back up. You may see this yellow area right here. This used to be called the province of Havana. That has now changed. So I think this map is German. I'm not quite sure. This is the Caribbean Sea, Gulf of Mexico. So I don't know if this is German or something else, but it doesn't matter. There are 15 provinces in Cuba, and then one of what is called a special municipality, and that is down here. This is Isla de la Juventud, or the Isle of Youth. It's a special municipality that is not under the oversight of any of the provinces. It's administered by the national government. I'm not sure why it is that way. It used to be called the Isle of Pines instead of the Isle of Youth, but the name was changed in 1978 in response to a speech that Fidel Castro gave, where he spoke about the future of the youth of Cuba, and they decided it was appropriate to rename this island. And the old province of Havana in 2010, because it had gotten so big, they split it into two provinces, in Artemisa and Mayabeque. So we have 15 provinces: Pinar del Rio, Artemisa, City of Havana, Mayabeque, Matanzas, Cienfuegos, Villa Clara, Sancti Spiritus, Ciego de Avila, Camagüey, Las Tunas, Holguin, Granma, Santiago de Cuba, and Guantanamo. So those are the 15 provinces and the special municipality that makes up the political divisions of the nation, the Republic of Cuba. Interesting picture from outer space showing some storms, or at least some cloudy weather over the island. I want to talk a little bit about the topography of Cuba. And this figure may be helpful. Cuba, very much of it is a flat land. One thing I want to point out is the multitude of little islands. You can see that there are just a gazillion of these little tiny islands all over the place. The topography, the topographic map shows there are some elevated areas down here in the middle and off to the west. I don't quite read the top line of the slide in my view, but it shows, I don't know if you can see it, it shows the square miles of the entire country of Cuba. The coastline is 3,500 miles long. And the length from the east coast tip to the westernmost tip is 780 miles long. The width is 119 miles at its widest, which I'm assuming is this area right here. And it's only 19 miles wide at its narrowest point, so that's either right here or maybe right there. Cuba is the largest island in the Caribbean, and it's the 8th largest island nation in the world.
George, can I ask you something?
Please do.
When you say right here, are you using your cursor? Because I can't see your cursor.
It's not showing up?
Yeah.
So you're not seeing a black cursor moving then?
No.
Okay, I'm not quite sure how to fix that, but I'll at least try to be aware of that. So I'm not talking about something where I'm not showing. Thank you.
Okay.
So looking a little bit about the topography and a little bit better expansion, this is what's called a hypsometric map showing elevation and depth of both the landmass and the water around it. And all the area that's in green is above water, green or red or yellow. The area that's gray or blue is below water. So you can see along the southern coast, much of it is fairly shallow. That gray color is anywhere between 0 and 200 kilometers deep. You have to get a little bit further off the land before the water gets much deeper. There are several mountain ranges there on the island. On the southwest, we have the Sierra Maestra mountain range.
George, did you mean to say 200 kilometers or 200 meters?
Meters.
Yeah. Okay.
Meters, you're right. The
Right.
map itself is showing kilometers, but those have got to be meters.
Yeah.
Thank you. So on the southeastern part, we have the Sierra Maestra Mountains. Above that, we have the Sierra Cristal Mountains. In the middle of the island, we have the Sierra del Escambray Mountains. And then on the west, we have Cordillera de Guanico Mountains. I don't know that I'm saying that right. Maybe Lorenda, you might correct me if I'm got it wrong. There's a lot of syllables in there.
Guanico is correct.
I try to remember that the next to the last syllable should get the accent, but doesn't always translate into what comes out of my mouth. So we've got these 4 different mountain ranges in Cuba. And here's the older map to give you an idea of what we're looking at. So the Sierra Maestra Mountains stretch across Granma, Santiago de Cuba, and Guantanamo. The Sierra Cristal Mountains are in the province of Holguin. The Sierra del Escambray Mountains are Cienfuego, Villa Clara, and Sancti Spiritus. And then the Cordillera Mountains are primarily in Pinar del Rio. The highest mountain in the country is Pico Torquino, or the turquoise peak. There's uncertainty why it's called turquoise, but that's what it means in Spanish. This mountain is only 6,476 feet tall, which is nowhere near what we might see in the Rockies here in the United States. But that is the high point in Cuba. One other thing I want to point out here, there is a trench under the ocean surface that is fairly deep. It's going probably down to more than 6,000 meters below sea level. And this Cayman Trench extends from the southeast corner of Cuba all the way over to Central America. I'm sure there's some tectonic idea behind that, but I don't know enough to say. So here's a picture of the Pico Torquino. It's located in the Sierra Maestra mountain range in the city of Guamá in Santiago de Cuba province. There are 5 large rivers in Cuba. 3 of them are in the eastern part of the country. 1 is in the middle and 1 is in the east. So the longest river is the Cauto River, which is in Santiago de Cuba and Granma. The Toa River is in Guantanamo province, and Guamá River is in Guantanamo province too. Initially, this river emptied into the Caribbean, but they built a dam called El Punto, maybe that's the city where they built it, to provide irrigation water for agriculture. The Yomori River is in central Cuba, and it drains into the Bay of Matanzas. Folklore says that this name is the word that was cried out by indigenous people who were committing suicide by leaping off a cliff into the river to avoid harsh treatment by colonial masters. This river is popular with tourists, although I don't think for this reason. And then finally, the Almendares River is in western Cuba, and that provides the water supply for the city of Havana. And you would think for a city that's the national capital that they would have a good water supply, but for most residences in Havana, they only have water available every other day of the week. This is a map of part of the city of Matanzas, and you can see the Yumari River as it comes from northwest down to southeast to empty in the Bay of Matanzas. One of the points I wanted to raise here is that above this river is the location of the seminary that's in Matanzas, the Seminario Evangelico de Teologia, or the SET. And we have stayed at that seminary numerous times. This is part of what the seminary looks like. It's a very pleasant place. They grow a lot of crops, and we'll probably talk about that later. Both for the students and staff at the seminary, as well as to sell in the community. And turning around from that previous view, this is looking out. So there's the Bay of Matanzas out there in front. And to the left is the Yumari River. So we have been around that one at least, not so much the others. Now, those are not the only rivers, of course. This is not a very meaningful list for you, but this shows rivers that are on the north coast going from west to east, and then rivers that open onto the south coast going from west to east. And the 5 large ones that I mentioned were the Cauto River, the Toa River, the Guamá River, Yumari River, and the Almendares River. Now there's another one on this list just below Yumari, and that's the Canimar River. This river also opens into the Bay of Matanzas, and when the Universal Presbyterian Youth Group went to Cuba in 2012, we actually took a boat ride on this river. As we traveled from church to church through Cuba, we did participation with the youth groups at the different churches we stopped at. So we took a boat on the Rio Canimar. El Barco is the boat. I'm back taking the casual approach. The kids are up more towards the front. But interesting point here, in Cuba, because transportation has a lot of limitations, hitchhiking is a very common way of getting around. And typically you stand at the side of the road and stick out 2 fingers like that and shake it up and down that says, I need a ride. And there's some sort of obligation, I don't know whether it's legal or just cultural, but if you have capacity to pick somebody up, then you do. So here are some of the kids that were on that trip. Some of you may recognize some of them, and not so well from the back. But here, we got to the stopping point. There was a camp, a park, that also had an outdoor restaurant. So the kids went into the water. Now, this was 8 years ago, so these kids have got a few more miles on them. You may recognize some of them. There's Gabi, Perry, one of the Irvines. I never remember which one. There's Graham, Nichols, Alex Esser, Jojo,
Reynolds.
blank on the last name.
Reynolds?
Reynolds, thank you.
Joseph Reynolds. Joseph Reynolds is now a youth elder.
Yes. So they grow up no matter what. So the boat ride ended here, and we stopped into this park and had dinner. And Linda Walker, who was one of the other adult leaders, decided to take the ride on a Brahma bull that they had there. Probably one of the pictures she regrets letting me take. Well, also while we were in that area, the group went snorkeling. I didn't go because I had an infected foot. The infection was crawling up my leg. So I was trying to deal with the medical system. But the signs here say, welcome, the Coral Park, vamos por más, come for more. And they had a deal there where they would take pictures of you while you were snorkeling, and then they would sell you a CD with all the pictures on it. So I don't know if you can recognize any of the faces. That may be, I think that's Alex Esser on the right, maybe Gabi in the middle, and I'm not sure on the left. Once those goggles and masks go on, it's kind of hard to tell. One more site in the Matanzas area that we visited on that particular youth group trip was a cave, La Caverna Bellamar, in Matanzas. And we went with our youth group and the youth group from one of the churches that we stopped at, and went down into this cave. And I'd always been under the impression that when you went into a cave, things got colder. That was not the case. The deeper we went, the warmer it got. And you can see that the heat was taking a toll, at least on me. The man to the right is Dopico, the pastor of the Veradero Church, and he's also been president of the Cuban Council of Churches. And of course, Linda Walker there with me. So as we got down to the bottom of the area available to the people touring, we had a group shot. Again, some of the faces you see, besides myself and Linda. There's Dopico. Since I start trying to name them, I'll have trouble with name recall. But it was a fun trip. As we move from central Cuba, the area of Matanzas, towards Havana, this is a famous landmark, and we frequently stop here. This is the Bacuna-Yagua Bridge. It's the highest and longest bridge in Cuba. And it's located at the border between the provinces of Mayabeque and Matanzas. And that's quite a deep drop off down there to the bottom of the bridge. They have an area where you can pull off, and they have of course, a tourist gizmo sales store. But they've got a nice viewing area where you can get pictures of this. And you can see these are sort of mountains, but they're really high hills. And if you look off to the left, this is the kind of scene we saw. Very often we see palm trees like that as we drive through Cuba. It's a very common sight. So let's move into Havana as we cover our geography. This is showing just part of Havana. We have on the right is the Bay of Havana. And there's what looks like a canal that opens into the bay. Out to the top and left of this figure is the Caribbean Sea. And I guess going straight up, going to the upper right of this figure would be going north to the United States. So South America would be going sort of in the direction of the upper left corner, trying to orient you. This figure is off of a tourist site, so it's got several points of interest highlighted here. In Spanish, Havana is referred to as La Habana. And there are a number of numbered locations here. Number one is Old Havana, or Habana Viejo, or Vieja, I don't remember which, but this is the touristy part of Havana that everyone goes to. Area number 2 on this map, which is underneath number 10, is Get this covered up on my screen, so I can't read my own little key here. There, Havana Cathedral. So there's a major church right there at number 2. Number 3 is the Malecon. The Malecon is a seawall that runs along the northwest and west boundary of Havana. It's a seawall that is a very popular hangout for low-cost dates, or just a place to hang out. You've got the waves rushing up against the seawall. Sometimes there are musical groups playing there. So it's a very popular place for Cubans to go visit. Number 4 is the location right in sort of the center here of the national capital, and I'll show you some images of that. Number 5 is the Museum of the Revolution. I've been there, and Nell and I have been there. And this was kind of a difficult museum for me to go through. Of course, it's dedicated to the revolution of Fidel, Raul Castro, and the rest from Batista and the establishment. And so a lot of the artifacts and the signage and video and visuals are about the revolutionary battles. What made it a challenge for me, and I had to keep biting my tongue, is that every disaster that ever befell anybody, whether it was the Bay of Pigs, which is arguably okay, but also hailstorm, was somehow caused by the CIA. So the CIA was the scapegoat for everything that ever happened, and there's no real way to know how much role our government played in things that happened in Cuba in the revolution and post-revolutionary period. I'm sure there's some. Number 6 is Revolution Square. We'll come back, I'll show you some pictures of that. Number 7 is the Old Square. This is the center of Old Havana. And this figure is from a tourist site, and Cuba was famous for rum. So site number 8 is the Bacardi building, and site number 9 is the Havana Club Museum of Rum. I have not visited those sites. However, I have visited location number 10, which is La Bodeguita del Medio. This is a bar that's very famous because it's where Ernest Hemingway used to drink. It's one of the 2 bars that he used to hang out in. So it's a very popular place to go. I do admit to having been there more than once. Another thing to point out in this image is that you can see on that sort of canal that opens into the Bay of Havana, there's actually an underwater highway. So it goes from the mainland of Havana to the land that's on the other side of the bay. And there is a very famous castle and fortress there. It's called the Morro Castle. And I sort of, part of my controls here that you can't see obscure this, but Morro Castle has been there, oops, come back, quite a while. It was built to protect Havana from marauding troops. But in 1762, the British invaded and captured Havana, coming through the overland route along that area north of the bay. They decided to take the Morro Castle and enlarge it considerably, and it became what was known as La Cabana. So this is the site that you often see.
Isn't that the fort that does the cannon firing and the symbolic?
Yes, exactly. And I've actually got a picture of that. So this became known as Fortaleza de San Carlos de la Cabana. It's the Fort of St. Charles. It's the 3rd largest fortress or castle in the Americas, and it was finished in 1774, built for King Carlos III of Spain. And it is much larger than it appears here. Here's an aerial view, and even this really doesn't show the magnitude of it very much, but this is the fortress and castle that was put in place there to protect Havana from invaders. There's another view right here, and you can see near the bottom of this picture the opening of the tunnel from that underwater highway that comes from mainland of Havana onto this land on the other side of the bay. And you can see a little bit of the Malecon going down the edge of the water. And you get an idea a little bit of the extent of the castle to the left. And it's a very popular tourist event. It used to be the case that to protect the city of Havana from invaders, that a chain or perhaps a rope would be drawn up between the castle and the mainland of Havana at dusk to prevent any marauders from getting into the Bay of Matanzas and attacking. To warn people in Havana that this barricade was being pulled into place because it would impact businesses that involve boat traffic in and out of the bay, they would fire a cannon off to warn people that this chain was being pulled up. So there's now, wrong direction. So there's now a ceremony. You can go and pay your couple of dollars, and they ceremonially fire this cannon for the tourists. You can see there are a lot of people there. The cannon is kind of a blur, but it's right in the middle of the picture. And it's very interesting because they have reenactors dressed like 1800s Spanish troops that march carrying period appropriate weapons, and they do formation marching back and forth, up and down, left and right. And then eventually they end up at the cannon and it's fired, and then everybody goes home. There's a nice museum behind there, and of course there are many people selling trinkets to the tourists. So we've taken youth groups there several times, and some of the adult groups. Going a little bit further down from the castle is this statue, the Cristo de la Habana, Christ of Havana. It's made from white Italian Carrara marble that was blessed by the Pope at the time. It's 66 feet tall, and you can get an idea of the size by seeing the people that are at the base of this statue. What's kind of ironic is that this was commissioned, installed, and then dedicated, inaugurated finally on March 24th, 1958, which was 2 weeks before Castro's invading troops entered Havana during the revolution. Despite that fact, and the fact that Cuba initially was officially an atheistic country, there never seemed to be any damage done to the statue or anything to isolate it from people having access to it. That's one of the places I've never had the chance to actually get. Here's another aerial shot showing Havana, now looking north towards the United States, and you can see near the top on the far side of the bay where that castle is. And you can see, I've indicated here, where the Malecon is running along the edge of the boundary of Havana with the Caribbean Sea. And this being Cuba, there's another common site right here, a baseball field. Baseball is the most popular sport in Cuba, and we see these pop up just about everywhere. And here's actually a shot of an old American car driving along the Malecon. So you can see as the waves hit the seawall, you can get quite a spray. This is the National Capitol building. If it looks familiar, it's because it's modeled on the U.S. Capitol, except I'm told that it's 1 meter taller. And this particular picture is before the restoration that they just recently completed. So you can see a lot of damage to the facade. It looks very nice, and for a while it was a museum while they were doing the renovation, and it's my understanding that the government has moved back in, so this is now functioning as the National Capitol again. Off to the right is another building that's very neat, impressive. It's the State Opera House, an incredibly elaborate building, and they also renovated this one recently. I've been trying to decide, this is either Rococo or, what do we decide? Similar architectural era, Baroque. Rococo is at the end of the Baroque era. So this is either Baroque or Rococo architecture, extremely elaborate. But I think it's neat that in Cuba, they maintain a culture not only of popular music, but of opera as a big part of their culture. Here's a picture taken at night, so you can see a little bit of the Opera House on the right and the National Capitol on the left. And you'll see a lot of the vehicles here are the old American cars. It turns out those are mostly for tourists. People living in Cuba, Cubans don't very often take advantage of this, but this is often a second source of income for people. If we move a little bit further down the street, so the Opera House would be in the upper left corner of this shot, there are several hotels here. The one that's in turquoise, I've forgotten the name of it. Maybe Laura might recall this, because when we went to do the water installation at Matanzas Central, our last night we stayed at this hotel. And I was very impressed when we got to the room. The bedspread had been folded into the shape of a swan, including a large neck and head. Pretty impressive to me. But you can see here, a lot of the vehicles here are the old American cars, but not all of them. A number of the cars are Russian cars called Ladas. And it's too bad I don't have my cursor here, but if you look on the right edge, there are 3 reddish cars. The one in the middle is a Lada. By the bus, there's looks like a very dark green Lada. These cars are very inexpensive relative to other vehicles in Cuba, but they seem to last a long time. They're Russian model. Now you will see new vehicles there, but none of the American brands because of the embargo. So there are Mercedes and there are Fiats and there are Hondas and so on. A lot of the buses are Chinese. They have a fairly good bus system throughout the country. One of the other transportation modes there are what are called cocoa taxis. These are essentially a motorcycle with a fiberglass shell put on it that has a bench for the driver. Behind that, a bench where 2 or 3 people can sit. I've always referred to these as huevos taxis because they look kind of like an egg shape to me. But these are also used quite a bit by tourists to get around in Havana. So here's an aerial shot. In the center, you can see, again, the National Capitol, center just a little bit to the left of the center. And then to the right of that is the State Opera House and then those hotels that I mentioned. And the street that's going along past all those is sometimes called Calle de Leones, or the Street of Lions. It has a nice wide boulevard, and they've got these giant bronze lion statues at several places along the street. I think you can see that the density of buildings is pretty high in Havana. And when you get outside of the tourist areas, the maintenance of these buildings is not very good, and it's not unheard of. It happened during one of our trips that the building will actually collapse and people die as a result. Going further down the Malecon, this is the U.S. Embassy. When I took this picture, this was the U.S. Special Interest System, because this was taken before President Obama normalized relations and reopened our embassy there. If you look on the left edge, there's a balcony. And that balcony faces out to the Caribbean. Here's actually a view from the inside. I'm guessing this must be the office of the ambassador, because there's only one of them. So probably the ambassador is going to be the one that has it. So you can see the Caribbean there to the left. And in front of you, there are a whole bunch of flagpoles. Talk about that in a second. Well, here we go. This has been named the Anti-Imperialism Plaza. It used to be very common for Fidel Castro to give political speeches that went on for hours in this plaza. And at some point, somebody in our embassy decided it would be a great idea to set up a scrolling digital sign with disparaging comments about Cuba, about Castro, and about communism. So in retaliation, Castro had all of these flagpoles established here, installed here. And when there was a flag on each flagpole, they could effectively completely block the view of the U.S. embassy from anybody who was in the plaza to hear Castro speak. In the trip that we took in 2016, it was after U.S. had reestablished its embassy here. And this group right here, which included Michael, I think he took the picture, we thought it'd be great to go visit the embassy, which is behind that Anti-Imperialism Plaza. It turns out, though, if you don't have an advance appointment, you don't get in. So we took our picture out front, and it was all we could do.
Guards who will very not so politely ask you to leave very quickly.
Yeah, they don't like you hanging around because they worry about what you might be up to. Another feature
Cubans or
along the
the
Malachi.
US?
I'm sorry?
Is it the Cubans or the US that didn't let you hang around?
It
Actually,
was
both.
security that was guarding the embassy. So we're walking around with short barrel semi-automatic rifles and approached us in less than 5 minutes and told us to leave pretty quickly after arriving.
So there were some of them were.
I'm sorry,
Cuban
Michael, I
military.
didn't get who that was. Was it a Cubans or Americans that approached you?
It was Cuban security that was guarding the outside of the U.S. embassy.
So Americans would be inside the walls, although I don't remember seeing any. On one of our trips there, they were doing some renovation, and this is a trip that Pat went on with, my wife Pat, if you don't know her. And she picked up a chip of rock from the plaza and brought it back, and it's in the water feature out front of the church as a memento. This landmark right here is also on the Malecon. This is a memorial to what we call the Spanish-American War, and what the Cubans call the Cuban War of Independence against Spain. You can see some cannons there and a number of figures. There used to be an American eagle with gold paint or gold applique, I'm not sure which, on the top of this, but after the revolution, Castro came in, they removed that eagle, and no one knows where it is any longer. So the Revolutionary Plaza that I pointed out in that map of Havana is more sort of in the center of Havana. This is a fairly tall structure, and this memorial is to Jose Marti. Jose Marti is sort of the father of Cuba in much the way we look at George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. He is a revered figure. He was a poet, a philosopher, a political scientist. He was also involved in the revolution. And you will see a bust of his head almost any place you go throughout the country. It's very popular to have these structures. So that's the memorial. To the back of me, when I took this picture, there's a huge parking lot where people would come when there's going to do some sort of ceremonial event. And behind that are a number of very commonly seen buildings of the Cuban government. And they're interesting because they have these neat wireframe sculptures on them. This one, which is the Ministry of the Interior building, is the outline of Che Guevara, a revolutionary who was part of the Cuban Revolution, and then later got involved in other revolutions in Central and South America. And the quote down there says, "Hasta la victoria siempre," or until victory, always. And that looks like a lot of pickup truck. I never noticed that before. And then to the left of this building is another one, which has this wireframe sculpture of Camilo Cienfuegos. He's another key figure with Fidel and Che in the Cuban Revolution, but he's not very well known to us. And the quotation here is, "Vas bien, Fidel," or "You doing fine, Fidel." And this is the Ministry of Informatics and Communications building. Now, just to finish up with the geography, this is an image taken from Google Earth of our partner church's little town, San Jose de los Ramos, in Matanzas province. The last population figure I could find was for 2011, and there were 5,700 people in this town. It's 11 miles northeast of the city of Cologne. That's the nearest city of any size. And 117 miles east of Havana. If you watch the little blue star come flying down, that little blue asterisk is the location of our partner church. And you can see just to the right of that, there's an open field, which again has that familiar shape of a baseball diamond. In addition, this big field is used for grazing of livestock. It's very common in Cuba for people to have horses or cows, pigs, goats, and they will take them and stake them out and let them graze all day, and at the end of the day, they'll come and pick them up again. I guess they don't have to mow them, but they don't really worry about that anyway. So this is where our partner church is located, and this is what it looks like. This is, in Spanish, church is iglesia. So this is Gethsemane Presbyterian Church in San Jose de los Ramos. This city has been around many, many years, or this church has been around many, many years. There is a bell tower with a cross on top. One of our trips, there was a beehive that had been established up there, and they went up to try and clear it out. The building you see is the sanctuary building. So the door that we can see there in brown is the rear door to the sanctuary. To the right, there is a courtyard. And then further to the right of that is the pastor's home. And we'll be talking about this much more as we go on. I want to talk a little bit about demographics here. Try to go through this quickly because time is running out. You can see in the upper right a map of the population of Cuba starting at about 1775. And it grew steadily from 1900 up to the present. In the year 2018, the population was 11.2 million, which reminds me, I forgot to mention some numbers that were on one of my earlier slides, but that's all right. The year after that, the population had dropped to 11,193,000. So it dropped 16,000 people or so. One of the reasons it was thought of that this happened, what has been suggested, was that the openness between Cuba and the United States was making people feel freer to move from Cuba to the United States. And at the same time, the United States announced and then later enacted an end to the policy called dry foot. The dry foot policy said, and it just applied to Cubans, said if a Cuban managed to set foot on dry ground, then they were granted visa and opportunity for citizenship. So the word was out that the dry foot policy was ending, and that may be part of the reason why the population dropped. But also, in the last few years, Cuba has been experiencing very hard times in terms of resources, agricultural, oil, personal hygiene products, toothpaste, all kinds of things. So it may have affected the population somewhat that way also. I've got some comparisons here. The birth rate in Cuba is 9.92 children per 1,000 people. So it's lower than the birth rate of the United States, which is 11.6. And this works out to one birth every 4 minutes in Cuba. I don't know why somebody calculated that, but it struck me as interesting. The fertility rate is 1.45 children per woman compared to the United States at 1.71. So the families in Cuba are smaller, fewer children. The death rate is 7.58 people per 1,000 people in the population, which is lower than that of the United States of 8.9. And that's one death every 6 minutes. So if there's one born every 4 minutes and one dying every 6 minutes, you would expect some population growth, I think. Life expectancy in Cuba is 78 years, and in the United States is 78.5, so that's about the same. But Cuba has a lower infant mortality rate than the United States, 4.76 compared to 5.8. So the population is dropping and the birth rate has been dropping. The birth rate probably a reflection of the difficult times to live in Cuba that they're experiencing the last few years. This, I don't have an equivalent for the American or for the United States, but this shows the distribution of people by different ages. So the bottom blue and pink are male and females between 0 and 4 years of age, all the way up to the top 100 plus years of age. And a difference that I see here compared to what I believe is the case for the United States is the United States, the percentage of aged population is heavily weighed towards women. Women live longer than men. So in the United States, I think the blues would be shrunk compared to the pinks here. But the median age in Cuba is 41.8 years. Some other demographic information, and I've got to do a disclaimer here. We're not actually comparing apples and oranges, but this may give you an idea between data from Cuba in 2012 and then US data in 2016 in terms of the racial makeup of the population.
George, before you go on.
Yeah.
I'd just like us to acknowledge that given our resources, it's amazing that the mortality rate in Cuba is comparable to ours.
Better than ours, really.
Yeah, and the infant mortality rate is better than ours. So I think that's something that we have to acknowledge.
I think so. And Cuba has universal health care. They may not always have antibiotics, but health care is available and free to everybody.
Yeah.
Although
Even
there's still a difference in availability based on your status.
Oh, absolutely.
People in prominent positions get the very best of the health care. Low-income people in rural areas probably don't do as well. Who definitely don't do as well. In terms of the racial demographics in Cuba versus the United States, I don't choose these terms. This was what was published. In Cuba, 64% of the population is listed as white, 9% as black, and then they combine everybody else into mulatto and mestizo, which is 27%. The use of mulatto is a dated term, but this is what the numbers were listed as. If we compare that to the United States, the percent of white in the population is about the same, 63 versus 64. The population of black in the United States is higher, but I'd point out that the mulatto and mestizo group in Cuba, that 26.6%, a large portion of the people in that group in the United States would self-identify as black. Mulatto technically meaning mixed race, usually black and white, often half and half, but not necessarily the case.
And I would say if Cuba is anything like the rest of Latin America, many people who are not white will self-identify as white because of the advantages that brings.
Yeah.
And it's allowed.
Cuba is not blind to race any more than the United States is.
Yeah.
In the US data, they split the non-black into white, non-Hispanic, and then Hispanic. So the two sets of data are not the same, but maybe it gives you sort of a rough idea. In terms of religion, in Cuba, 60% of the population is Roman Catholic. About a fourth of the population say they're not religious, and only 5% of the population is Protestant or other Christian groups like Mormons. In Cuba, there's 11% that is others, including a large group is the Santeria, which is an African-based religion which has incorporated Christianity with the spiritualism of the African belief systems that came over with slaves. In the United States, only 20% of us are Roman Catholic and 45% are Protestant or other Christian. So there's quite a difference, a flip-flop between Catholic and Protestant between the two countries. In terms of literacy, which is defined as people over the 15 or older who can read and write, Cuba has a 99.8% literacy rate compared to our 86 in the United States. So the educational system there is compulsory, and it's pretty much uniform. Everyone has what is defined as literacy. The predominant languages in Cuba, of course, start out with Spanish, and the dialect comes from the Canary Islands, which was the main source of Spanish-speaking colonial people moving into Cuba. There's also Haitian Creole, because Haiti is to the east of Cuba, and there is actually a French influence on the eastern part of Cuba. And then English is fairly uniformly taught in the schools throughout Cuba. In the United States, we've got all kinds of languages in much greater proportions: English, Spanish, Chinese, Tagalog, Vietnamese, Arabic, French, Korean, and many others. In terms of ancestral origin, the Spanish origin into the island of Cuba initially came primarily from the Canary Islands, but then also from several regions of Spain: Catalans, the Andalusians, Galicians, and Asturians. The African slave trade brought many people, many bodies into Cuba. In fact, the British were, we'll get into this in a later meeting, but the British were a major source, at least at one point, of the African slaves. From the Americas, population in Cuba comes from either Haiti or Jamaica, both of which contributed some of the French influence. And then there are all kinds of European sources: German, French, Portuguese, Italian, Russian, and Irish. There are some Asians there: Chinese, Koreans, and Filipinos. Some Lebanese from the Middle East, and a Jewish population, which is kind of scattered. And I have to admit, a lot of the information I pulled here came from Wikipedia.
The ultimate source.
As an academic, I'm aware that one must always take the internet with a grain of salt for data. But there are a couple of links there if you really want to read up on any of this. There's much more that could have contributed. But I managed to get through most of this within just a few minutes past an hour. And this is kind of a nice shot. I like the fact that we have an American flag and a Cuban flag. And when Linda Walker and Hannah Sampson and I took the youth group to Cuba in 2012, I got some pins made up that combined, well, we bought double pin stick pins and gave each of the kids a pin that had an American flag and a Cuban flag on it. But later on, we had some pins made that had the PCUSA logo, along with the Presbyterian Church of Cuba as part of that. So maybe that will show up later. So that is what I wanted to present today. And I want to stop the share and come back. I'm sorry that it may be a kind of a boring, dry lecture. That's what I do. That's my career. I covered a lot of territory, I thought. But do you have any questions?
Will this be our test?
Michael?
In the beginning, when you talked about that statue that was in honor of the Pope, I think.
Jose Marti or the Christ of Vienna?
The Christ statue. You
Yeah.
said something about Cuba being mostly atheistic at that time?
Well, the statue was erected and dedicated 2 weeks before Castro entered Havana at the start of the revolution. So the Batista government, the predecessor government, had commissioned that and got it installed. So it was in place once the revolution happened. And it's no longer the case, but the Cuban Constitution initially, I am told, included a provision that it was an atheist country. Since one of the very first visits by one of the popes back about 2012, maybe, or a little bit earlier, the country has softened up a lot, and it's become much more accepting of different religious beliefs, especially Christianity. In the reading that I've done, there are a lot of people in the church who maintained sort of an in-the-home church presence. It was not allowed to build new churches. It still is not as I understand it, not possible to build new church buildings.
Churches are not allowed to own property.
Not allowed to what?
Own property.
Own property,
They
yeah.
don't own property anymore. So all the churches that exist or anything that's growing is actually privately held land that is being used by a church.
And we saw that in Sabanilla.
Has that changed under the new constitution?
I don't believe so. I don't think so.
I thought that at the last Cuba partners meeting, they were talking about that changing.
There was a lot of hope in the revision of the Constitution, including acceptance of same-sex marriage, but that was eliminated before the Constitution was finally approved. So a lot of the promised changes that they hoped might happen did not come about. However, with the severe shortage that they're undergoing right now, there are changes happening right now. The 10% fee that was charged to convert dollars to Cuban CUCs is gone. So there's no longer that penalty. They are actually trying to become a dollar-driven economy. They have set up stores that only accept American dollars for appliances and even food. But you can't physically use American dollars. You have to set up a bank account and get a debit card that is issued in dollars, and you use that at these new dollar stores.
My understanding is that a lot of the reason behind that is with the travel shutdown from the pandemic, they're no longer able to pull the US dollars out of the black market because the government still runs most of the black market down there. And so what they had been doing is using the black market of American dollars to pull that cash money in so that they could make purchases on the international market, because the rest of the countries don't like to exchange money in CUCs because the exchange rate is significantly less favorable. They've arbitrarily set that the Cuban dollar is equivalent to the American dollar in their own exchange rate, at least as I understand it. And so they don't have any dollars to be able to purchase things from Europeans at a reasonable rate, and they're hemorrhaging money severely in being able to try and keep up supplies that they had been otherwise buying with US cash that they were getting from the black market.
And Margaret asked about the pandemic there. Cuba they were very aggressive in locking down when the pandemic hit, and they have been much less severely impacted than the United States. The churches quit meeting. So our partner church, they would go call on different people and do kind of little mini services. The hot spots were Havana and I don't remember, Santiago de Cuba. There were two cities that were major hotspots for cases. So they opened up when the infection rate dropped down to nearly zero. They opened all the country to a phase 2, except for those 2 population centers that had the high rates. And our partner church has started having worship services again. Everybody was wearing masks. They were spacing themselves out in the pews. And then there was a resurgence in Havana. So they locked down again for about 2 weeks. And they are now, just as of this week, our partner church is back to having services in the church again. So they've done a pretty good job. At one point, there were 11 cases when I was following this. So when you think of the tens of thousands of Americans that have died and the hundreds of thousands have been infected, they're talking 10s and 20s in Cuba. So the pandemic was much less of a disaster there compared to what we're still undergoing.
Much less of a political tool also.
Yeah.
So George, it's Laura. I want to make sure that everybody got an invitation to the Cuba Partner Network webinar. Did you send that out?
I didn't. I can send that out to all this group. The Cuba Partners Network, if you're not aware, is an organization of the Presbyterian Church made up of mostly Presbyterian churches who have partnerships with churches in Cuba or with presbyteries. And it has an annual meeting, and every 5th year the meeting is in Cuba. And it was scheduled to be in Cuba this fall, and they decided they had to cancel it. So we're going to be doing an online version. Last year it was in New Orleans. Before that it was in Florida. It's been in Chicago a couple of times. It's been in Dallas. So I usually try to get to that meeting whenever I could. And I know Linda Walker and Lorinda were at the last one, and Nell was. So I will forward to all of you if you're interested in inviting. So it's like $20, I think, to register, and it's going to be a Zoom type meeting. And there will be, I don't know if we're going to have physically anybody from Cuba, probably not, but it's turned.
Yes, we are. Yes, we're having Ludmila from First Havana. We're having Ari from Matanzas. We're having Dora from the Synod. We're having Iset from Havana, and Carlos Emilio Ham from the seminary, and possibly Pastor Abel and Allison and Sarah E. But
Wonderful.
The first 5 I mentioned are confirmed. They're actually going to do a pre-recorded update on the situation in Cuba, including travel. Sarah Ann is going to do a session on communication tools. They're showing the video of the 130 years of Cuban Presbyterian Church.
With English subtitles?
With English
Yep.
subtitles. We're celebrating 20 years of the PCUSA Cuba Partner Network. Pastor Dora is preaching, and then there'll be an advocacy session on the last day, and our mission co-workers will present, and then we'll have breakouts for presbyteries, synod, and set, and we'll have free chat time at the end of every day.
Did you say free snack time?
Chat.
One thing about the Cuba Partners Network meeting, Laura is always in charge of registration and management, and she always has more snacks than we can ever consume. So there is a plethora of snacks the whole time.
That's right.
So I will send that out in the next day or so. I will send out that invitation to all of you. It's September
25th and 26th.
26th, I think. So I think it's like a Friday evening and then all day Saturday, maybe.
Well, it's Friday evening, and I'm giving
2 sessions
Eastern
on Saturday.
time. Friday evening, 8 to 9:30. This is Eastern. Saturday, 1 to 3, and then 3:30 to 6.
So it's not a huge time commitment, and you might find it interesting.
Yeah.
I love
George,
the fact that I'm sorry.
While we've been on this Zoom, you and I have received an email from Beatty, Pastor Beatty, but you can't read it because you're conducting the Zoom. But at the end, may I read her email because it's in the form of a prayer?
Sure. Good way to close.
So you tell me when.
Okay. I was just going to point out that I'm tickled by the fact that I know more Presbyterian ministers in Cuba than I do anywhere else. So I know probably 3/4 of the ministers in Cuba. But that prayer, Beatty Casas is a co-pastor with her husband, Ari Fernandez, at Matanzas Central Church. And she is also our liaison person in the partnership that we have between the Presbytery South Louisiana and the Presbytery Matanzas. So if you would, go ahead, Laura, and we'll close out with that then.
Oh, okay. Dear George and Laura, with Hurricane Laura in your way, we pray that God keeps you safe. We know about your suffering and struggles and ask God for peace, reconciliation, and love. We pray for all our brothers and sisters in South Louisiana Presbytery. Please give our greetings to all your churches and let them know we love you and have you in our prayers and hearts. With love, Beatty.
Wonderful.
Very nice.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Well,
That's why we do what we do.
That's right. And I'm fortunate that I have almost daily communication with Josue, the pastor in San Jose. So I'm able to keep up with how they're going there. Next week at the same time, I hope to talk about history. I hope to make it a little bit shorter and give a little bit more time for chat and discussion. And I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, George.
Bye.
Thanks, George.
Thanks, George.
Thanks, George.
My pleasure.
Good to see everybody.
Bye.
Bye now.
Good night, Jorg.
Good night.